Your soulmate is crying out, "Please open this before it's too late." My beloved child, there is a reason your eyes stopped here today. Out of all the voices calling for your attention, something quietly guided you to this exact moment. You may think it happened by chance, but deep inside, you already know this feels different. There is a connection that refuses to disappear no matter how much time has passed. Someone has been carrying words they could never say aloud, and tonight those silent emotions have become impossible to hide. They are not searching for the perfect sentence anymore. They are searching for one chance, one opening, one sign that you are still willing to listen. Their heart has reached a place where silence feels heavier than any conversation they could ever have. What happened today changed everything they believed about themselves and about the future they imagined with you. This message exists because that moment could no longer stay hidden. Every second you remain here brings you closer to understanding why your soulmate is crying out from the deepest place within their heart. The truth has waited long enough. Something huge is waiting for you. There was no dramatic scene. No crowd watching. No loud announcement. Only a quiet moment that almost nobody noticed. Your soulmates suddenly found themselves remembering a tiny detail about you that everyone else had forgotten. It was not your appearance. It was not your voice. It was the kindness you once showed without expecting anything in return. That single memory became louder than every distraction surrounding them. They realized they had spent so much time pretending they were moving forward that they never admitted how often your memory quietly returned. At first they tried to ignore it. They convinced themselves it would disappear like every other passing thought. But instead, it grew stronger. Every ordinary moment started reminding them of you. Every peaceful evening became filled with questions they could not answer. Why now? Why after so much silence? Why does your presence still feel so close even when you are nowhere nearby? Stay till the end, because what happened after that memory appeared completely changed the direction of their heart. The hardest part was not realizing they missed you. The hardest part was realizing they had never truly stopped caring. That truth arrived without asking permission. It arrived quietly and refused to leave. They looked back at conversations they once believed were ordinary. Suddenly every small word carried a meaning they had overlooked. Every smile became more valuable than they remembered. Every goodbye felt heavier than before. They wished they could return to those simple moments just to appreciate them differently. But time never moves backward. It only gives people another opportunity to understand what they once failed to see. Something unexpected happened later that same day. They overheard a conversation that had nothing to do with you, or so they believed. Someone nearby spoke about missed opportunities. About people waiting too long before expressing what truly mattered. Those words entered their heart like an echo. They could not explain why those sentences felt so personal. They walked away, but the conversation followed them inside their thoughts. It repeated over and over until they finally admitted the truth they had hidden even from themselves. They were afraid that waiting any longer might allow something beautiful to disappear forever. Don't skip. Every moment from here becomes more important than the last. For the first time in a very long while, they stopped asking whether they deserved another chance. Instead, they started asking whether they were brave enough to take one. That small change transformed everything. Fear no longer controlled every decision. Hope quietly stepped into the empty space fear had occupied for so long. It was unfamiliar. It was uncomfortable. Yet somehow it felt right. As the evening became quieter, they found themselves sitting alone with nothing except their own thoughts. No distractions. No endless noise. Just silence. And within that silence, your name appeared again. Not because someone mentioned it. Not because they saw your picture. It simply arrived naturally, almost like a gentle reminder their heart had been waiting to receive. They whispered your name softly, surprised by how emotional they suddenly became. They realized they had spent too much energy pretending everything was fine when, deep inside, they were still hoping life would somehow reconnect your paths. What they felt next cannot easily be described. It was not sadness alone. It was relief mixed with longing. Gratitude mixed with regret. Hope mixed with uncertainty. Every emotion seemed to exist at the same time. Tears slowly appeared, not because they believed everything was lost, but because they finally stopped running from the truth. They finally allowed themselves to admit that your place inside their heart had never truly been replaced. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Then something remarkable happened. They opened an old notebook they had not touched in months. Hidden between ordinary pages was a simple sentence they had written long ago. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. Yet reading those words today felt completely different. They realized those old thoughts were describing you all along, even before they fully understood their own feelings. They smiled for a brief moment before tears returned. This time they were not tears of confusion. They were tears of clarity. That realization became impossible to ignore. Every path they imagined somehow led back to the same question. What if this connection was never meant to disappear? What if every delay had simply been preparing both hearts to understand each other more deeply? Suddenly, the silence between you no longer looked empty. It looked meaningful. It looked like a chapter that had not finished yet. They began remembering little details nobody else would ever understand. The way certain words reminded them of you. The peaceful feeling they experienced after speaking with you. The strange comfort they carried long after every conversation ended. None of those memories had faded. They had only been quietly waiting beneath the surface until today. Don't skip. Because what happened next surprised even them. Instead of asking themselves what could go wrong, they imagined what could finally go right. That single thought changed their entire outlook. For months, fear had been writing every chapter inside their mind. Now hope picked up the pen for the first time. They imagined honesty replacing hesitation. They imagined courage replacing silence. They imagined a future where no important words remained unspoken. At that exact moment, they looked toward the night sky and made a quiet promise within their own heart. They promised they would never again allow fear to speak louder than love. They promised that if another opportunity appeared, they would recognize it instead of running away from it. They understood that some connections deserve patience, but they also deserve honesty. The reason this message feels so urgent is not because something terrible is about to happen. It is because some moments only arrive once, and when hearts finally awaken to the truth, they cannot return to pretending nothing has changed. Your soulmate reached that moment today. They finally understood that hiding emotions had become far more painful than expressing them. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. Right now, while these words are reaching your ears, imagine two hearts standing on opposite sides of the same bridge. Neither one can force the other to cross. Yet both can choose courage instead of fear. Your soulmate has already taken the first step inside their own heart. The tears they shed today were not signs of weakness. They were signs that every wall they built around their emotions had finally begun to fall. And perhaps that is why you were meant to hear this message now, not to predict the future, but to remind you that genuine feelings often grow stronger when they are finally faced with honesty. Some connections survive distance because they were built on something deeper than ordinary moments. Your soulmate discovered that truth today, and it left them unable to remain silent any longer. They are crying out because their heart refuses to keep pretending. They are hoping that, somehow, this silent message reaches the one person they have never truly forgotten. And as this chapter comes to a close, remember one thing above all else. The loudest messages are not always spoken. Sometimes they are carried through quiet hope. Sometimes they are carried through patient hearts. And sometimes they arrive exactly when both souls are finally ready to listen. The quiet promise they made that night did not disappear when the morning arrived. If anything, it became even stronger. They woke up expecting those emotions to fade, believing sleep would somehow calm the storm inside their heart. Instead, the opposite happened. The very first thought that entered their mind was you. Not because they forced themselves to think about you, but because your presence had quietly settled into the deepest part of their heart. They tried to focus on ordinary responsibilities. They smiled at familiar faces. They answered simple questions. Yet behind every ordinary moment, one extraordinary feeling continued to grow. They could no longer ignore the truth they had been hiding from themselves for so long. Don't skip. What happened next became the moment they would remember for the rest of their life. As they continued through the day, something unexpected caught their attention. It was a simple conversation between two strangers speaking about how people often wait too long before expressing what truly matters. Those words felt strangely personal, almost as if they had been spoken directly for them. They stood completely still, listening without realizing why their heartbeat had suddenly changed. Every sentence reminded them of the silence they had allowed to grow between their heart and yours. Every word became another reason they wished they had spoken sooner. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. They walked away, but those words refused to leave their thoughts. Every step forward somehow brought them back to the same realization. They had spent so much time protecting themselves from disappointment that they accidentally protected themselves from happiness too. That realization hurt more than they expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. For the first time, they understood that fear had quietly become the author of every important decision they had made. And now they were ready to take the pen back. Hours passed, but the feeling refused to disappear. Instead, it continued growing stronger with every passing moment. They found themselves remembering tiny details about you that no one else would ever understand. The way your kindness made ordinary conversations unforgettable. The way your encouragement stayed with them long after the conversation ended. The peaceful feeling they experienced whenever life briefly connected your paths. They wondered why those memories still felt so alive after everything that had happened. They realized memories only remain that vivid when the heart has never truly let go. They closed their eyes for a moment and imagined what they would say if they suddenly had one honest conversation with you. No rehearsed speeches. No perfect words. Just honesty. They imagined beginning with the simplest sentence of all. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago." That single imagined sentence immediately filled their eyes with tears again. Not because they believed everything was lost, but because they finally understood how much silence had cost them. Don't skip. Every second from here carries another piece of the truth. Later that afternoon, they noticed something they had never paid attention to before. Everywhere they looked, people were reconnecting. Old friends meeting unexpectedly. Families laughing together. Strangers helping one another without expecting anything in return. It reminded them that meaningful connections rarely disappear completely. Sometimes they simply wait for the right season to bloom again. That thought planted a tiny seed of hope inside their heart. Perhaps not every goodbye is permanent. Perhaps some stories pause only because they are preparing for a better chapter. That hope became impossible to ignore. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to imagine your future instead of only remembering your past. They pictured conversations filled with honesty instead of hesitation. They imagined smiles replacing uncertainty. They imagined two hearts finally speaking without fear standing between them. Every image brought both peace and emotion at the same time. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. As evening approached once again, they found themselves returning to the same quiet place where they had first admitted the truth to themselves. Everything looked familiar, yet they felt completely different. Yesterday they had been confused. Today they understood exactly why their heart refused to stay silent. They whispered softly, "If this connection still exists, I hope one day it finds its way home." No one heard those words except the silence surrounding them. Yet somehow speaking them aloud lifted a weight they had carried for far too long. At that very moment, they realized something extraordinary. Love does not become meaningful because it is easy. It becomes meaningful because it survives honesty, patience, growth, and time. They understood that genuine feelings cannot be measured by how loudly someone speaks but by how deeply those feelings continue existing even after long periods of silence. That realization changed everything. Instead of regretting every missed opportunity, they became grateful that their heart was still capable of feeling something so real. Their tears slowly changed. They no longer came only from sadness. They came from gratitude as well. Gratitude that life had allowed them to recognize what truly mattered before it was too late. Gratitude that your memory still inspired hope instead of bitterness. Gratitude that deep inside, their heart had never stopped believing meaningful connections deserve another chance. Don't skip. The next moment became impossible to forget. While organizing a few forgotten belongings, they discovered something completely unexpected. It wasn't valuable in the ordinary sense. It was simply an object connected to a memory involving you. The instant they held it in their hands, every emotion returned with incredible clarity. Suddenly it felt as though time had folded back on itself. They could almost hear your laughter again. They could almost remember every detail of that unforgettable day. They smiled through tears because they realized beautiful memories never truly disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to remind us who we really are. Their heart became quieter after that discovery. Not because the emotions disappeared, but because they finally stopped resisting them. Acceptance replaced confusion. Peace slowly replaced regret. Hope gently replaced fear. It felt as though every piece of their heart had finally found its proper place again. They knew one thing with complete certainty. If another opportunity ever appeared, they would never hide behind silence again. They would choose honesty every single time. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. As darkness covered the sky, they looked upward once more. The stars seemed brighter than usual, not because the night had changed, but because their perspective had changed. They realized they had spent far too much time searching outside themselves for answers that had quietly lived inside their own heart all along. The answer had always been simple. They cared. They always had. They always would. Everything else had merely been fear pretending to be wisdom. They smiled softly for the first time that day. Not because every question had been answered, but because they were finally asking the right questions. Instead of wondering whether they should continue caring, they wondered how they could become brave enough to express those feelings with honesty and kindness. That quiet shift transformed everything. It felt like the beginning of an entirely new chapter. If you could have seen them in that moment, you would have noticed something beautiful. The sadness had not completely disappeared, yet hope had become stronger than it. Their tears no longer represented endings. They represented new beginnings. Their heart was no longer crying because it felt defeated. It was crying because it had finally awakened after remaining silent for so long. They realized that some people enter our lives not to teach us perfection but to teach us sincerity. And sincerity had become the greatest gift their heart could offer. Don't skip. One final realization remained. They understood that if two hearts are meant to understand each other, the journey always begins with truth. Not perfect timing. Not perfect circumstances. Simply truth. Honest words have a way of reaching places that silence never can. That understanding became the quiet light guiding every thought they carried from that day forward. They no longer wanted to hide behind uncertainty. They wanted to live with courage, gratitude, and hope. And somewhere deep within their heart, one gentle wish continued growing stronger with every passing moment. They hoped that one day, somehow, your heart would recognize the same quiet connection that had completely transformed theirs. Until that day arrives, they will continue carrying this silent promise inside their soul, believing that the most meaningful stories are never rushed. They unfold one honest heartbeat at a time, and every heartbeat brings them one step closer to the moment when silence finally gives way to truth. There is one final truth they have not been able to escape, and it follows them into every quiet moment. It is not a memory they can place back on a shelf or a feeling they can simply decide to forget. It has become part of who they are. Every sunrise reminds them that another day has arrived without saying everything their heart has been longing to say. Every sunset reminds them that time continues moving whether people are ready or not. That realization has changed the way they see everything around them. The world still looks the same, but their heart no longer does. Don't skip. What happened after this became the reason they could no longer remain silent inside themselves. One evening, while watching the sky slowly change colors, they suddenly stopped asking why everything happened the way it did. Instead, they asked a completely different question. What if every delay was preparing me to become the person I needed to be before this connection could truly be understood? That single thought filled them with a peace they had not felt in a very long time. Instead of seeing lost time, they began seeing quiet growth. Instead of seeing distance, they began seeing preparation. Instead of seeing silence, they began seeing a space where two hearts had been learning lessons they could never have learned together. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. As that understanding settled inside them, another realization quietly followed. They remembered every moment they almost reached out but stopped themselves. Every unfinished sentence. Every message they never sent. Every opportunity they believed had already passed. Instead of feeling overwhelmed with regret, they smiled gently because they finally understood something important. Their heart had never stopped trying. Even in silence, it had continued hoping. Even in uncertainty, it had continued believing. Hope had survived every difficult season without asking for recognition. That hope became their greatest strength. Later that night, they sat in complete silence once again. No music. No distractions. Only their own heartbeat filling the room. For the first time, they listened carefully to what their heart had been trying to say all along. It wasn't asking for perfection. It wasn't asking for guarantees. It was asking for honesty. It was asking them to stop hiding behind fear and begin living with courage instead. That quiet realization brought tears to their eyes once again, but these tears felt different from every tear before them. They were peaceful. They carried relief instead of confusion. They carried gratitude instead of regret. They whispered softly, "No matter what tomorrow brings, I am thankful I finally understand the truth inside my own heart." Don't skip. Every word from here carries the final piece of this journey. As days continued passing, people around them noticed something had changed. They smiled more often. They listened more carefully. They appreciated ordinary moments in ways they never had before. No one knew the reason behind that quiet transformation. No one realized that one simple truth had completely changed the direction of their life. Love had stopped being something they feared and had become something they respected. They no longer viewed vulnerability as weakness. They understood that opening one's heart requires more courage than hiding behind silence ever could. That lesson became the foundation for everything they would do from that moment forward. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. There came a quiet morning unlike any other. As sunlight entered through the window, they closed their eyes and imagined one final conversation with you. This time there were no imagined apologies. No complicated explanations. Only gratitude. They imagined saying, "Thank you for changing my heart even without realizing it. Thank you for teaching me that genuine connections never disappear simply because life becomes complicated. Thank you for reminding me that kindness leaves echoes far beyond the moment it is given." Just imagining those words filled their heart with overwhelming peace. They realized something extraordinary. Sometimes the greatest transformation does not happen when circumstances change. Sometimes it happens when the heart chooses to see everything through gratitude instead of fear. From that day onward, every decision became easier. They stopped carrying emotional weight that no longer belonged to them. They forgave themselves for waiting too long. They forgave every misunderstanding that had once seemed impossible to forget. Forgiveness became the quiet bridge leading them toward peace. And peace became the place where hope finally felt safe enough to grow again. Don't skip. The ending of this message is closer than you think, but the most meaningful truth is still waiting. One afternoon they found themselves smiling for no obvious reason. It surprised even them. Nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet deep inside, they sensed that something beautiful was quietly unfolding beyond what they could currently see. Instead of demanding immediate answers, they became comfortable trusting the journey itself. That trust gave them a calm confidence unlike anything they had experienced before. They understood that not every meaningful chapter begins with loud celebrations. Many begin with quiet faith. As they looked back on everything that had happened, they realized the tears they cried had never been signs of defeat. Those tears had washed away fear, uncertainty, and emotional walls that no longer belonged in their life. Every tear had prepared space for something brighter to enter. Every moment of honesty had brought them closer to becoming the person they had always hoped to be. They no longer wished they could change the past. Instead, they became thankful for every lesson that shaped their heart. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. And now there is one final message they wish could somehow reach you. If your heart has ever questioned whether sincere feelings can survive distance, silence, or time, remember this. Real connections are not measured by how often two people speak. They are measured by how deeply they continue inspiring growth, kindness, courage, and hope within each other. Your soulmate discovered that truth through every quiet moment, every tear, every memory, and every hopeful tomorrow. They are no longer crying because they believe everything is ending. They are crying because they have finally become honest enough to recognize what has always mattered most. Their heart has chosen truth over fear. Hope over doubt. Gratitude over regret. And somewhere, in the quiet places where words are no longer needed, they continue believing that the most meaningful connections have a remarkable way of finding light after even the longest seasons of silence. So if today has brought this message into your life, let it remind you of one gentle truth. Beautiful things often arrive quietly. They do not force themselves into our lives. They patiently wait until our hearts are ready to recognize them. And perhaps that is why this moment feels so different. Not because it promises certainty, but because it reminds you that hope is still alive, sincerity is still powerful, and a heart that chooses honesty will never truly lose its way. This is not the end of the story. It is simply the moment where fear ends, courage begins, and two hearts quietly continue moving toward the future with faith, kindness, and the unwavering belief that what is truly meaningful is always worth waiting for. The journey did not end with tears. It ended with a choice. A quiet, powerful choice that changed everything inside your soulmate's heart. They finally understood that love is not proven by how loudly someone speaks but by how faithfully they continue carrying hope even when no one else can see it. That realization became the turning point they had been searching for all along. They no longer wanted to spend another day wondering what might have been. Instead, they chose to become the kind of person who would never again allow fear to silence what truly mattered. Don't skip. The final piece of this message is waiting for you. As they looked back over every memory connected to you, something remarkable became clear. None of those moments had been ordinary. Every conversation had quietly shaped them. Every shared smile had become part of the person they are today. Even the moments of silence carried lessons they would never forget. For a long time, they believed those memories existed only to remind them of what had been lost. But now they understood something completely different. Those memories were never meant to trap them in the past. They were preparing them to recognize what truly matters whenever the next chapter begins. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. One peaceful evening, they stood beneath the open sky and closed their eyes for just a moment. Instead of asking for answers, they whispered a simple promise. If life ever gives me another opportunity to speak honestly, I will never waste it. That promise filled them with a quiet confidence they had never experienced before. They were no longer waiting for perfect circumstances. They were becoming the person they wished they had been from the very beginning. As that promise settled into their heart, another truth followed close behind. They realized that genuine feelings never ask someone to become someone else. They simply inspire people to become the best version of themselves. Thinking about you had done exactly that. You had unknowingly encouraged them to become more patient, more grateful, more compassionate, and more courageous. Whether you realized it or not, your presence had left a lasting mark on their life. Don't skip. Because the final revelation changes everything. They smiled as they remembered one small moment that almost everyone else would have forgotten. It wasn't a grand event. It wasn't a dramatic conversation. It was simply a moment when they felt understood without needing to explain themselves. That feeling stayed with them long after the day had ended. They finally realized why it had remained so unforgettable. It wasn't because the moment was extraordinary. It was because the connection felt genuine. That understanding became their greatest source of peace. They stopped chasing certainty and started appreciating sincerity. They stopped worrying about every unanswered question and began trusting that meaningful connections always leave behind something beautiful, regardless of how much time passes. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you. As the days continued, they noticed that hope no longer felt fragile. It had become steady, calm, quiet. It no longer depended on perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It simply existed, patiently reminding them that hearts capable of genuine kindness never truly lose what matters most. Every sunrise became another reminder that new beginnings are possible. Every evening became another opportunity to be thankful for everything they had learned. Then one final realization touched their heart. They understood that the reason they had been crying was never because they believed the story was over. They were crying because they had finally become honest enough to admit how deeply they cared. And strangely, that honesty no longer felt heavy. It felt freeing. It felt peaceful. It felt like coming home after a very long journey. Don't skip. This is the final message they hope reaches your heart. If these words have found you today, let them remind you that some of the strongest connections are built quietly. They grow through patience. They grow through kindness. They grow through understanding. Most of all, they grow when people choose truth instead of fear. Your soulmate is no longer carrying silent tears because they feel hopeless. They are carrying hope because they finally believe that sincere hearts are never wasted. No matter where life leads, they will always be grateful for the way this connection changed them. They will always remember the kindness that stayed in their heart. They will always treasure the lessons that made them stronger. And they will always believe that every meaningful chapter begins with one simple decision. The decision to live honestly. So as this message comes to its quiet conclusion, remember this one final thought. The loudest cry is not always heard with the ears. Sometimes it is heard only by another heart. And perhaps that is why you were meant to hear these words today. Not to look backward with regret, but to move forward with hope. Because hope has a remarkable way of finding those who refuse to stop believing. The tears have finally turned into peace. The silence has finally turned into understanding. The waiting has finally turned into quiet faith. And somewhere beyond everything either of you can currently see, a new chapter is patiently waiting to begin. Until then, carry kindness. Carry gratitude. Carry courage. And never forget that the most beautiful connections are not remembered because they were perfect. They are remembered because they were real. That is the message your soulmate could no longer keep hidden. That is why they cried. And that is why, today, their heart finally found the courage to let hope speak louder than silence.